When my daughter Caroline took her last breath, the heart monitor flatlining into a singular, piercing tone that signaled the end of my world. Her husband Brandon did not cry. He did not hold her hand. He checked his watch. 3 days later, standing on the wet concrete of the driveway in the Hamptons, he looked at me with eyes that held no grief, only the cold calculation of a man who had just won the lottery. "Get out, old man," he sneered, throwing my vintage leather suitcase down the stairs, where it landed with a sickening crack against the pavement. "Caroline is dead, and so is your free ride. This villa, the $30 million life insurance policy, it is all mine now. You are just a piece of trash I forgot to take out. Go die in a dumpster for all I care." I stood there, the rain soaking through my coat, watching him take a sip of my own 60-year-old scotch. He thought he was looking at a helpless 72-year-old pensioner. He had no idea he was looking at the man who built the very skyline he worshipped. He thought the game was over, but he had just made the opening move against a grandmaster. Before we continue this story of absolute justice, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to teach a lesson to someone who mistook your kindness for weakness. The rain in the Hamptons has a specific way of chilling you to the bone, not because of the temperature, but because of the isolation. It was a gray, relentless drizzle that coated the world in a sheen of misery, perfectly matching the funeral black I was wearing. But there had been no funeral. Brandon had insisted on a direct cremation. No service, no friends, no memory. He claimed it was what Caroline wanted, but I knew it was because he could not wait to get the grieving period over with, so he could start spending the money. I looked down at my suitcase. It was a Valextra piece I had bought in Milan 40 years ago. Sturdy and elegant. But now it lay sideways in a puddle, the brass lock twisted from the impact of the fall. I did not bend down to pick it up immediately. Instead, I looked up at the man standing on the covered porch of the house I had paid for, the house I had put in my daughter's name to ensure her security. Brandon Cole stood there like a lord surveying his new kingdom. He was wearing an Italian silk suit that cost more than most people's cars. A suit he had bought yesterday with the credit card I had given Caroline for emergencies. He wasn't mourning. He was celebrating. In his right hand, he held a crystal tumbler filled with amber liquid. I recognized the bottle sitting on the outdoor table behind him. It was a Johnny Walker Blue Label, the limited edition 1950 vintage. I had been saving that bottle for a special occasion, perhaps the birth of a grandchild or my own 80th birthday. Now my son-in-law was using it to toast my eviction. "You are still standing there," Brandon shouted, his voice echoing off the stone facade of the mansion. "I told you the Uber is not coming." "All the way up the driveway. You have to walk to the main road." I adjusted my glasses, wiping the rain from the lenses with a handkerchief I kept in my pocket. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream. I did not give him the satisfaction of seeing me beg. In my 40 years on Wall Street, I learned that the man who shouts is the man who has lost control. Silence is the loudest noise you can make. "Brandon," I said, my voice steady, cutting through the sound of the rain. "You are making a mistake. Not a small mistake, a catastrophic one." He laughed, a harsh barking sound that grated on my ears. "The only mistake was Caroline not dying sooner," he spat out, taking a large gulp of the rare scotch as if it were cheap beer. "Do you know how hard it was pretending to like you, old man? Listening to your boring stories about the old days. pretending to respect a washed-up retiree who lived in our guest room like a parasite. It is over. The house is mine. The insurance money clears next week. $30 million, Winston. Do you know what I can do with $30 million? I knew exactly what $30 million could do. I had made that amount before breakfast in 1998. I had lost that amount in 2008 and made it back double by 2010. Money to me was a tool, a lever to move the world. To Brandon, it was just a way to feed his ego. You are confident, I observed, watching him lean against the stone pillar. You believe the will is straightforward. He sneered at me. I saw the will, Winston. Caroline left everything to her surviving spouse. That is me. Simple law. Now get off my property before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. Imagine that the great Winston Graves being hauled away in cuffs like a vagrant. He took another step forward, his shiny loafers stopping just short of the wet steps. He didn't want to ruin his shoes. I looked at him closely, memorizing this moment. I wanted to remember the arrogance, the tilt of his chin, the way he held the glass. I wanted to etch it into my mind, so that later, when he was on his knees, I could compare the two images. I will go, I said calmly. But answer me one question, Brandon. Are you absolutely certain you want to play this hand? Because once I walk out that gate, there is no taking it back. There is no apology that will fix this. He swirled the ice in his glass, looking at me with pure contempt. The only thing I am certain of is that I never want to see your wrinkled face again. You are a reminder of a life I hated. Go die in a dumpster, Winston. It is where you belong. He turned his back on me, dismissing me as if I were nothing more than a stray dog. I stood there for a moment, feeling the cold water seep into my shoes. A normal father would be broken. A normal 72-year-old man would be terrified, wondering where he would sleep, wondering how he would survive. But I was not a normal man. I was Winston Graves, and Brandon Cole had just made the last mistake of his life. Just as I bent down to check the handle of my suitcase, the roar of an engine cut through the quiet hum of the rain. I turned to see a Porsche 911 Turbo in a garish shade of lipstick red tearing up the long driveway. It was moving too fast, the tires spraying gravel and water onto the manicured lawn. The car screeched to a halt just inches from where I was standing, forcing me to step back into the mud to avoid being hit. The driver's door flew open and a woman stepped out. It was Tanya. I knew her, or rather, I knew of her. She was a so-called influencer, an Instagram model who had been lingering around Brandon's circle of friends for the last 2 years. She was young, perhaps 25, with hair that was too blonde and lips that were too full. She was wearing a white tennis skirt and a cropped sweater, completely inappropriate for the weather, but perfect for showing off. But it wasn't her clothes that made my blood run cold. It was what was around her neck. Strung tightly against her throat was a double strand of Akoya pearls with a diamond clasp. My heart hammered against my ribs, a painful physical thud. Those were Caroline's pearls. I had bought them for her 16th birthday in Tokyo. She had worn them on her wedding day. She had worn them in the casket just 3 days ago before the cremation. Or so I thought. Brandon, you liar, I whispered to myself. You stripped her body before you burned it. Tanya didn't even look at me at first. She was too busy shaking an umbrella open, protecting her hair from the drizzle. She marched up the steps toward Brandon, her heels clicking sharply on the stone. Baby, you said he would be gone by now, she whined, her voice high and grating. I thought we were going to have the whole place to ourselves. You promised me a celebration." Brandon's face softened instantly, transforming from the cruel mask he wore for me into a sickening grin of adoration. He stepped down one level and wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. "He is leaving right now, babe," he assured her, kissing her temple. "Look, he is just packing up his trash." Tanya turned to look at me, then her eyes scanning me up and down with profound disgust. She looked at me the way one looks at a cockroach that refuses to die. "Ew," she said simply. "Why is he staring at me? Make him stop, Brandon. It is creepy." "He is just jealous," Brandon laughed. "He knows he is looking at the new queen of the castle." Tanya touched the pearls at her throat, fingering the diamonds that I had paid for, the diamonds my daughter had loved. "Nice pearls, right, Grandpa?" she mocked me. "Brandon gave them to me yesterday. A little welcome home gift. He said Caroline never had the neck for them anyway. Said they looked better on me." The rage that filled me then was not hot. It was absolute zero. It was a coldness so deep it froze my breath in my lungs. They were talking about my dead daughter, my Caroline, who had passed away less than a week ago from a sudden aneurysm. And here they were, wearing her jewelry, drinking my liquor, and planning their future on her grave. It wasn't just a betrayal of me. It was a desecration of her memory. "You took them off her body," I said, my voice low and dangerous. Brandon shrugged, unbothered. "She didn't need them where she was going. Besides, Ash doesn't wear diamonds. Tanya deserves them. She is alive. She is vibrant. She is everything Caroline wasn't in the last few years." "Caroline was sick, you son of a bitch," I thought. "She was tired because she was working to support your gambling debts. She was stressed because she was trying to save this marriage." But I said nothing. I stored the information. Theft. Grave robbery in a moral sense, if not legal. Adultery. It was obvious now. This wasn't a new fling. The familiarity between them, the way she knew the gate code, the way she walked into the house as if she owned it. This had been going on for a long time. While my daughter was dying in the hospital, Brandon had been with her. I realized then that my daughter's death might have been the most convenient thing to ever happen to him. And that thought terrified me more than the rain or the poverty he wished upon me. "Why are you still here?" Tanya snapped, stamping her foot. "Get lost. Go to a shelter or something. Brandon, call security if he doesn't move." "I am going," I said. I picked up my suitcase. The handle was broken, so I had to carry it by the side, awkwardly hugging it to my chest like a refugee. "Good riddance," Brandon shouted, raising his glass in a mock toast. "Don't come back begging when you realize Social Security doesn't cover a penthouse. Enjoy the street, Winston." Tanya laughed, a cruel sound that mingled with the rain. "Bye-bye, Grandpa. Don't forget to write. Or actually, don't." They turned their backs on me. Brandon opened the heavy oak double doors of the villa and ushered Tanya inside. The warm golden light from the foyer spilled out onto the wet porch for a brief second, illuminating the luxury that lay within the marble floors. I had paid for the chandelier I had imported, the life I had built. Then the door slammed shut. The sound was final, like a gunshot echoing through the valley. The lock clicked. The deadbolt slid home. I was alone. I stood there in the silence of the driveway, the rain now coming down harder, matting my gray hair to my forehead. My hands were numb from the cold and the strain of holding the heavy case. To anyone watching from the road, I looked like a tragedy. An old man, discarded by his family, left to rot in the elements. A pathetic figure. But as the echo of the slamming door faded, I did something Brandon would not have expected. I straightened my back. I set the suitcase down on the pavement, not gently, but firmly. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small microfiber cloth. I took off my glasses, wiped the rain from them, and put them back on. The world came back into sharp focus. I looked at the closed door, at the windows where I could see the shadows of Brandon and Tanya moving around, pouring more drinks, likely celebrating their victory. They were dancing on the ceiling of their own ignorance. They saw an old man. They saw a retiree who spent his days gardening and reading newspapers. They saw a dependent. They did not see the man who had survived the crash of '87, the dot-com bubble, and the housing crisis of 2008. They did not see the man who had been known as the ghost of Wall Street, because I moved silently and struck without warning. I had spent the last 10 years playing the role of the gentle grandfather because I wanted peace. I wanted to be a father to Caroline, not a tycoon. I wanted to rest. I had handed the reins of my empire to trustees. I had hidden my assets in complex structures, not to deceive, but to protect. I wanted a simple life. But Brandon had just shattered that peace. He had broken the one rule I lived by. Do not touch my family. I reached into the inner pocket of my wet coat and pulled out a phone. It wasn't the smartphone Brandon saw me use to play solitaire. It was a satellite phone, a heavy black brick of a device that I kept charged for emergencies. This was an emergency. I dialed a number I hadn't called in 5 years. It rang once. Graves? A voice answered immediately. Crisp. Professional. No hesitation. It was Pendergast. It is time, I said into the phone, my voice devoid of the tremor of old age. There was a pause on the other end. Then Pendergast asked simply, "The comprehensive protocol?" "Total," I replied, looking up at the bedroom window where the light had just turned on. "Understood," Pendergast said. "Where are you?" "On the curb." "Send the car." "And Pendergast?" "Yes, sir." "Freeze everything. The accounts, the cards, the assets. Initiate the Omega Clause. Consider it done." I hung up the phone and put it back in my pocket. I looked at the house one last time. Brandon thought he had kicked me out into the cold. He thought he had sentenced me to a slow death in a dumpster. He was wrong. He hadn't kicked me out. He had set me free. He had released me from the obligation of being nice. He had released me from the constraints of being a family man. I picked up my suitcase again, but this time it didn't feel heavy. It felt like a weapon. I walked down the long driveway toward the main road, my steps measured and firm. I did not look back. 10 minutes later, a pair of headlights cut through the darkness. It wasn't a taxi. It wasn't an Uber. It was a Rolls-Royce Phantom, extended wheelbase, jet black, indistinguishable from the night itself. The car glided to a stop next to me. The rear door opened and a man in a dark suit stepped out, holding a large umbrella. He didn't look at my wet clothes or my broken suitcase with judgment. He looked at me with deference. "Good evening, Mr. Graves," he said, shielding me from the rain. "It has been a long time." "Hello, Arthur," I said, handing him the suitcase. "Take me to the Pierre Hotel. And call the team. We have work to do." As the heavy door of the Rolls-Royce closed, shutting out the cold and the rain and the silence of the Hamptons, I settled into the leather seat. I reached for the crystal decanter in the center console, poured myself a glass of water, and took a sip. Brandon Cole believed he had just inherited $30 million and a mansion. He believed he was the king of the world. He didn't know that the house belonged to a shell company. He didn't know the insurance policy had a morality clause. And he certainly didn't know that the old man he had just kicked out was the chairman of the board that owned his entire life. He wanted me to die in a dumpster. Instead, I was going to bury him. And I was going to enjoy every single second of it. The car pulled away, leaving the dark, wet street behind. The game had begun, and Brandon didn't even know he was playing. The silence inside the cabin of the Rolls-Royce Phantom was absolute, a vacuum that swallowed the sound of the rain and the humiliation of the last hour. The air smelled of hand-stitched leather and expensive mahogany, a scent that I had not allowed myself to enjoy for a decade. It was the scent of power. I leaned back into the deep seat, closing my eyes for a moment. Not to sleep, but to calibrate. The old man who gardened and fixed leaky faucets was gone. Winston Graves, the predator who had eaten conglomerates for breakfast in the 80s, had returned. Arthur sat in the driver's seat, his eyes watching me through the rear-view mirror, with a mixture of concern and professional readiness. He was not just a driver. Arthur was the executive vice president of Sovereign Private Bank, the institution I had founded 30 years ago and silently controlled ever since. He was the only man in New York who knew that the shuffling old retiree living in the guest room of the Hamptons estate was actually the owner of the mortgage note on that very property. Sir Arthur said, his voice low and respectful, breaking the silence. I took the liberty of bringing your dry clothes. They are in the trunk. And I have the tablet with the live access to the Omega Trust dashboard. Thank you, Arthur, I replied, my voice dropping an octave, shedding the wavering timbre of the grandfather I had pretended to be. Brandon thinks he has won the lottery. He thinks Caroline's death has unlocked a vault. He has no idea that the vault has a timer, and I am the only one with the code. I reached for the crystal glass of water, sipping it slowly, washing away the taste of the rain and the bile that had risen in my throat when I saw that woman wearing my daughter's pearls. Arthur merged the massive car onto the highway, the lights of the Hamptons fading behind us like a bad dream. "Do they know who you are, sir?" Arthur asked. "Does the son-in-law have any idea that he just kicked out the ghost of Wall Street?" I let out a dry, dark chuckle. "No, Arthur. To Brandon Cole, I am just a failed real estate agent who got lucky once in the 70s and lost it all. That was the narrative we built, remember? I wanted Caroline to be loved for herself, not for the Graves empire. I wanted to see if Brandon was a man or a leech. I spent 10 years playing the part of the poor dependent father-in-law just to see if he would treat me with dignity without a financial incentive. And the verdict? Arthur asked, though he already knew the answer. He failed, I said coldly. He failed spectacularly. He waited exactly 3 days after the funeral to show his true colors. He didn't just fail, Arthur. He declared war. And you know what I do with people who declare war on me. I acquire them, I dismantle them, and I sell the scraps. I recited my own old motto. Precisely, I said. I picked up the tablet Arthur had left for me. The screen glowed, illuminating my face with the blue light of raw data. I logged in using a biometric scanner that confirmed my identity. Winston Graves, chairman. The numbers scrolled across the screen, columns of figures that would make Brandon's head spin. The $30 million Brandon was celebrating wasn't a simple insurance payout. It was a distribution from the Graves Family Trust, managed by a shell company in the Cayman Islands. Caroline had been the beneficiary, but she had never owned the principal. The structure was designed to protect the assets from exactly this kind of situation. From predators, from gold diggers, from men like Brandon. Arthur, I said, my finger hovering over the screen. Initiate Protocol 0 on the primary accounts. Arthur nodded, keeping his eyes on the road. Protocol 0, sir. That will freeze all liquidity connected to the Cole household. The credit cards, the joint checking accounts, the access to the equity line of credit. Everything. Everything, I confirmed. Brandon is currently celebrating with a bottle of my scotch and a woman who is wearing my daughter's jewelry. I want his credit cards to decline before he can order a pizza. I want his bank accounts to show a balance of 0 by sunrise. I want him to wake up tomorrow morning, not as a millionaire, but as a man who cannot afford to buy a cup of coffee. Done, Arthur said, simply tapping a console on his dashboard. The command was sent. In the digital ether, invisible walls were slamming down around Brandon's financial life. I looked out the window at the passing headlights. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the lesson. I had lived a simple life for the last decade, not because I had to, but because I wanted to avoid the taxes. Yes, but mostly because I wanted to avoid the fake smiles. When you have $1 billion, everyone loves you. When you have a pension check, you find out who really loves you. Caroline had loved me. She knew the truth, of course, but she had kept my secret. She wanted a normal life, too. She wanted a husband who loved her, not her father's portfolio. She died thinking Brandon loved her. She died thinking he was just stressed, just worried about money. She never knew he was counting down the days. She never knew he was waiting for her heart to stop so his life could begin. That is why I have to destroy him, Arthur. I said quietly, more to myself than to the driver. He didn't just steal my house. He stole my daughter's peace. He made a mockery of her life. "We are approaching the city, sir," Arthur announced. "The Pierre has the penthouse prepared. Your suit for the meeting with Pendergast is pressed and waiting." "Good," I said. "And Arthur, there is one more thing." "Yes, sir?" "The offshore accounts, the ones Caroline set up for their future children, the ones Brandon thinks are his safety net, the ones he bragged about to his friends." "I know the ones," Arthur said. "The Singapore holdings." "Drain them," I ordered. "Not a freeze, a complete repatriation of funds. Move every cent back to the master trust under my name. When Brandon calls the bank in Singapore, I want them to tell him that the account never existed. I want him to question his own sanity. I want him to think the money was a hallucination." "Consider it done, Mr. Graves," Arthur said, his voice carrying a hint of satisfaction. "It is good to have you back, sir. The board has missed your specific style of management." "My style?" I mused, looking at my reflection in the darkened glass. "My style was ruthless efficiency. I didn't get angry. I got even. And then I got everything else." As the Manhattan skyline came into view, glittering like a pile of diamonds on black velvet, I felt the last remnants of the old grandfather shedding away. The grief for my daughter was still there, a heavy stone in my chest. But it had hardened into a cold resolve. Brandon had kicked a helpless old man out of his house. But the man arriving in New York tonight was the ghost of Wall Street. And tomorrow morning, the haunting would begin. Arthur pulled the car up to the private entrance of the hotel. Doormen rushed out, not realizing who was inside, but recognizing the authority of the vehicle. "Get some rest, Arthur," I said as the door opened. "Tomorrow we go to the lawyer's office. I want to see the look on his face when the will is read. I want to be in the room when he realizes that the $30 million has strings attached. Strings that I am holding." "Yes, sir," Arthur said, Good night, Mr. Graves. I stepped out of the car and into the cool city air. I was back. And Brandon Cole was already dead. He just didn't know it yet. While Arthur navigated the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan, carrying me toward my temporary fortress, a very different scene was unfolding back at the estate I had just been exiled from. I know every detail, not because I was there, but because I am a man who believes in redundancy. 3 years ago, when Brandon moved in, I had hidden microphones and high-definition cameras installed in the common areas, the library, and the master office. I told myself it was for security, but deep down, I knew I was waiting for him to make a mistake. I just never imagined the mistake would be this loud, or this satisfying to witness, on the tablet screen resting on my lap in the hotel suite. Back in the Hamptons, the heavy oak door had barely clicked shut behind me before Brandon unleashed the true nature he had kept leashed for years. He didn't go to comfort his mistress, or pour another drink immediately. Instead, he marched straight for my study, the one room in the house I had explicitly asked him to respect. It was a sanctuary of dark wood and leather, filled with first editions and naval artifacts I had collected over a lifetime. To Brandon, it was just square footage wasted on the past. He kicked the door open with a violence that made the wood splinter. "Get out!" he screamed at the empty room, his voice echoing with a manic energy. "Get out! Get out! Get out!" He wasn't yelling at me anymore. He was yelling at my ghost. At the presence of the man who had paid for his suits, his car, and his dinners for the last decade. He grabbed a porcelain vase from the mantel, a Ming Dynasty piece that had survived wars and revolutions, and hurled it against the stone fireplace. It shattered into 1,000 irrecoverable shards. Next, he went for the books. He began pulling them off the shelves by the handful, tearing pages, ripping covers, throwing them onto the floor like garbage. These were not just books. They were history. A signed copy of The Wealth of Nations, a first edition of The Great Gatsby. He was destroying them with the glee of a vandal who hates what he cannot understand. "This is going to be my man cave," he shouted to no one, his face flushed with adrenaline and expensive scotch. "I'm going to put a pool table right here, a 70-inch screen on that wall. No more dusty old books. No more boring stories. It is Brandon's time now." He swept his arm across my desk, sending my antique brass sextant crashing to the floor. Then he slumped into my leather chair. The chair from which I had orchestrated mergers that changed the American economy, and spun around, laughing like a child who has stolen the keys to the candy store. But the laughter stopped abruptly when his phone rang. It wasn't the standard ringtone. It was a harsh, jarring buzz that made him jump. He pulled the phone from his pocket and looked at the screen. The color drained from his face, instantly replacing the arrogant flush of victory with the pallor of fear. He hesitated, his thumb hovering over the decline button before he realized he had no choice. He answered, bringing the phone to his ear with a trembling hand. "Vinny," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that the high-sensitivity microphones picked up perfectly. "I told you not to call me at this number." He listened for a moment, his eyes darting around the room, as if he expected the person on the other end to step out of the shadows. I know what I said," Brandon stammered, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. "You do not have to threaten me. I know the deadline was yesterday. But listen to me, Vinny. Everything has changed." He stood up, pacing the room, kicking through the debris of my library. "She is dead, Vinny. Caroline is dead." He said it without a shred of sadness. He said it as if he were delivering a weather report, as if her death was nothing more than a transaction clearing. Yes, the funeral was 3 days ago. The death certificate is being processed. Do you understand what that means? It means the policy pays out. $30 million, Vinny. $30 million. He paused, listening to the voice on the other line. I could imagine what was being said. Threats, deadlines, interest rates that would make a loan shark blush. Stop talking about my knees, Brandon snapped, trying to regain his bravado. You are not going to touch me. I am going to be your biggest client. With $30 million, I could buy your whole operation. I will pay you the $500,000, plus the vigorish, plus a tip just for being patient. $500,000. I watched the screen, my own blood running cold. I knew Brandon was incompetent. I knew he was a gambler who liked to play big shot with other people's money. But I had no idea he was $500,000 in the hole to organized crime. It explained everything. The desperation, the rush to cremate Caroline, the immediate eviction. He wasn't just greedy, he was drowning. He had a gun to his head, and my daughter's life insurance was the only way to stop the trigger from being pulled. I need a week, Brandon pleaded, his voice cracking. Just 1 week for the insurance company to cut the check. I have the house too, Vinny. It is a Hamptons estate worth $10 million easy. I am the sole owner now. The old man is gone. I kicked him out tonight. There is no one left to stop me. He listened again, nodding frantically. Yes, I promise. 1 week. And Vinny, when I pay you off, I want to place a bet on the Knicks game. A big one. I am going to be rich, Vinny. I am going to be the king of New York. He hung up the phone and let out a long, shaky breath. He poured himself another drink, his hands shaking so badly the crystal decanter rattled against the glass. He downed it in one gulp, then looked around the room he had destroyed. I am safe, he whispered to himself, a manic grin returning to his face. I made it. He truly believed he had won. He believed that the death of his wife and the expulsion of his father-in-law had solved all his problems. He saw the $30 million as a done deal, an inevitable wave of cash that would wash away his sins and his debts. He didn't know that the house he was standing in was owned by a corporation he had never heard of. He didn't know that the insurance policy he was banking on had a clause that required him to be a faithful husband. And he didn't know that the man he owed money to probably reported to someone who banked with me. Brandon picked up a framed photograph from my desk. It was a picture of Caroline and me, taken on her graduation day. She was smiling, radiant and full of life. I looked proud and protective. Brandon looked at her face, the face of the woman who had loved him, who had worked herself to death, trying to support his delusions of grandeur. Sorry, babe, he said to the photo, his voice dripping with false sentiment. You were worth more dead than alive. Nothing personal, just business. He threw the photo into the fireplace, where it landed face down in the cold ash. I watched him from my hotel suite, hundreds of miles away, and felt a calm, deadly clarity settle over me. He had just confessed his motive to an empty room. He had admitted that my daughter was nothing more than a payday to him. He had destroyed my sanctuary and desecrated her memory, all to pay off a gambling debt. Brandon thought he was celebrating his victory. He didn't realize he was dancing on a trap door. And tomorrow morning at the reading of the will, I was going to pull the lever. He walked out of the library, leaving the lights on, leaving the wreckage of my life scattered on the floor. I switched off the feed, my hand steady. I had seen enough. The grief was gone, replaced by a cold, hard need for justice. Brandon Cole wanted to be a big shot. He wanted to play in the big leagues. Well, he was about to find out that in my league, when you lose, you don't just lose your money. You lose everything. The elevator doors to the 45th floor of the Pendergast building slid open with a whisper, revealing a reception area that was empty, save for a single security guard who nodded once as I passed. It was 5 in the morning. The city of New York was just beginning to stir below us, but inside the offices of Pendergast and Associates, the war room was already active. This was not a law firm that handled traffic tickets or divorces. This was a firm that handled empires. And today, they were going to dismantle a man. Julian Pendergast was waiting for me in the main conference room. He was a man of 60, with silver hair and a suit that cost more than Brandon's annual salary. He didn't look like a lawyer. He looked like a shark in a silk tie. On the massive mahogany table between us sat 3 stacks of documents, each one a nail in my son-in-law's coffin. "Good morning," Winston Pendergast said, standing to shake my hand. His grip was firm, his eyes cold and alert. "The coffee is fresh, and the trap is set." I sat down at the head of the table. I did not want coffee. I wanted results. "Show me the bait," I said. Pendergast slid the first folder toward me. "This is the will," he explained. "It is the standard document Caroline signed 5 years ago, leaving everything to her surviving spouse. This is what Brandon has seen. This is what his lawyer, if he even bothered to hire one, has seen. It is airtight. It gives him the house, the cash, the portfolio." I nodded, running my hand over the paper. It was the cheese in the mousetrap. "And the trigger?" I asked. Pendergast slid the second folder. It was thinner, but infinitely more dangerous. "The rider clause," he said with a thin smile. "Executed by Caroline 6 months ago, when she first suspected the affair. It activates automatically upon her death, but it contains the moral turpitude provision. It states clearly that any inheritance is contingent upon the beneficiary having maintained a monogamous relationship during the entirety of the marriage." I opened the folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper, signed by my daughter. Her handwriting shaky from the illness, but her intent clear. It was her final act of defiance, her way of protecting me, even from the grave. "Do we have the proof?" I asked, looking up at Pendergast. "Because Brandon will deny it. He will say Tanya is a grief counselor, or a cousin. He is a liar by trade." Pendergast didn't speak. He simply pushed the 3rd stack of documents toward me. It was a heavy black binder. I opened it. The first page was a photograph, taken with a telephoto lens. It showed Brandon and Tanya on a balcony in Miami. The date stamp was from 2 years ago. I flipped the page. Brandon and Tanya at a casino in Vegas. Brandon and Tanya looking at engagement rings in the Diamond District, while Caroline was at a doctor's appointment. There were hotel receipts, credit card statements, showing gifts of jewelry, handbags, and flights. There were text messages, printed out in chronological order, detailing their mockery of my daughter, their plans to spend her money, and their impatience for her to die. "It is comprehensive," Winston Pendergast said softly. "We have them dead to rights. The moment he claims the inheritance, he triggers the clause. The moment he triggers the clause, we present this evidence. The estate then reverts immediately to the secondary beneficiary, which is the Omega Trust." I finished closing the binder. "Correct. Of which you are the sole trustee." It was perfect. It was a legal guillotine. Brandon would walk into this room thinking he was a king, and he would leave as a pauper. "Is the room wired?" I asked, looking around the sleek conference space. "Every inch." Pendergast confirmed, tapping a small remote on the table. "Audio and video in 4K resolution. The microphones are embedded in the light fixtures. The cameras are behind the mirrors. We will capture every second of his reaction. I want it for the record, Winston, but mostly, I want it because you asked for it." I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, in a cheap hotel, or perhaps passed out on the floor of my library, Brandon was sleeping. He was dreaming of yachts and sports cars. He was dreaming of a life without consequences. "He thinks I am weak, Pendergast," I said, watching the sunrise paint the Hudson River in shades of gold and blood. "He thinks I am a senile old man who just needs a place to sleep. He has no idea that I bought the company he works for 3 weeks ago, just to fire him personally." Pendergast chuckled dryly. "That paperwork is in the 4th folder, Winston. The audit of his expense accounts was particularly damning. Embezzlement is a federal crime." "We will save that for dessert," I said, turning back to the table. "Let's serve the main course first." I checked my watch. It was 6:30. The meeting was scheduled for 9. Brandon would be here late, probably hungover, probably arrogant. He would bring that woman with him because he lacked the decency to keep her away. He would insult me. He would gloat. And then I would end him. I sat back down and opened the file containing the pictures of my daughter. I touched her face in the photo gently. "I promised you I would take care of it, sweetie," I whispered to the empty room. I looked at Pendergast. "Let them in when they arrive. Do not offer them coffee. Do not offer them a seat. Let them stand." "And Pendergast?" "Yes, Winston? When you read the clause, I want you to read it slowly. I want to see the hope drain out of his eyes, one drop at a time." "Understood." I smoothed my tie. The old grandfather cardigan was gone, replaced by a bespoke charcoal suit. The glasses were polished. The ghost of Wall Street was ready to haunt the living. "Let him come," I said. "I am ready." The clock on the wall ticked past 9:15, then 9:30. Julian Pendergast sat motionless at the head of the long mahogany table, his hands folded neatly over a closed file. I sat in the corner chair, the one designated for the less important guests. My back hunched, my hands trembling slightly as I clutched a worn paper cup of water. I had removed my bespoke jacket and loosened my tie just enough to look disheveled. To anyone walking in, I was the picture of a defeated old man, overwhelmed by grief and bureaucracy. Finally, at 9:45, the heavy glass doors swung open. They didn't just walk in, they made an entrance. Brandon led the way, striding into the silent room as if he were walking onto a yacht. He was wearing sunglasses indoors, dark aviators that hid his bloodshot eyes, but couldn't hide the smirk on his lips. His suit was wrinkled, likely from sleeping in it, and he smelled faintly of stale alcohol and expensive perfume. Tanya followed a step behind him, clinging to his arm like a trophy he had just won at a county fair. She was wearing a dress that was too short for a business meeting and too bright for a reading of a will. The pearls, my daughter's pearls, were still around her neck, glowing softly under the harsh conference room lights. She looked around the office with wide, greedy eyes, taking in the view of the city, the expensive art, the aura of money that permeated the air. "Sorry we are late," Brandon announced loudly, not sounding sorry at all. Traffic was a nightmare, and frankly, we had better things to do than rush to sign some papers. But hey, $30 million waits for no man, right? He pulled out the chair at the opposite end of the table, the one directly facing Pendergast, and sat down, throwing his legs out as if he were lounging in his own living room. Tanya sat next to him, pulling her chair so close their arms touched. She placed her designer handbag, a garish thing covered in logos, on the table with a heavy thud right next to Pendergast's pristine files. Pendergast looked at the bag, then at Brandon, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Cole," he said, his voice cool and level. "Miss Tanya, you are 45 minutes late." Brandon waved a dismissive hand. "Relax, counselor. You are billing by the hour, aren't you? Consider it a bonus. Now let's get this over with. Where do I sign?" "I have a meeting with a realtor at noon. We are upgrading." He hadn't even looked at me yet. To him, I was part of the furniture, a piece of debris that hadn't been swept away. "Mr. Cole Pendergast," said, ignoring Brandon's rush, "before we proceed, we must acknowledge all beneficiaries present. Mr. Graves, please join us at the table." Brandon finally turned his head, his sunglasses sliding down his nose as he peered at me in the corner. He let out a harsh laugh, a sound of genuine amusement. "Oh my God, he is here?" Brandon scoffed, shaking his head. "I thought I told you to get lost, Winston. What are you doing here? Hoping for a handout? Did you think if you showed up looking pathetic, I would toss you a few grand out of pity?" Tanya giggled, covering her mouth with a hand that sported a ring I recognized. It was an emerald solitaire Caroline had bought for herself after her first promotion. Another theft. "Look at him, Brandon," she whispered, loud enough for the microphones to catch. "He looks like a homeless person. Do we have to sit near him? He smells like old people." I slowly stood up, my knees cracking audibly, a theatrical touch I added for effect. I shuffled toward the table, keeping my head down, my eyes fixed on the floor. I pulled out the chair furthest from them, sitting on the edge as if I were ready to bolt. I just wanted to hear about Caroline," I stammered, my voice weak and raspy. Brandon rolled his eyes. "Jesus, Winston, give it a rest. Caroline is gone. The money is mine. You are not getting a dime. In fact, I am doing you a favor by letting you sit here. If you are good, maybe I will give you $100 for cab fare to the shelter. How does that sound?" $100 to kiss my ring?" He laughed again, looking at Tanya for approval. She beamed at him, stroking his arm. "You are so generous, baby," she cooed. Mr. Cole Pendergast interrupted, his voice cutting through their laughter like a scalpel. "If you are quite finished insulting the deceased's father, we have legal matters to attend to." Whatever Brandon said, leaning back and crossing his arms. "Read the will. Tell me I am rich. Tell the old man he is broke. Let's go." Pendergast opened the first folder. The sound of the paper turning was the only noise in the room. Brandon took off his sunglasses, tossing them onto the table. His eyes were glazed, but eager. He looked like a wolf waiting for a lamb chop. "The last will and testament of Caroline Graves," Cole Pendergast began reading. "Being of sound mind and body, I hereby declare this to be my last will, revoking all prior wills and codicils." Brandon drummed his fingers on the table impatiently. "Yada, yada, yada, skip to the good part. The assets. Who gets the house? Who gets the cash?" Pendergast looked up over his reading glasses. Article 3. Distribution of Assets. "To my lawful husband, Brandon Cole, I leave the entirety of my estate, including the property located at 14 Meadow Lane, East Hampton, and the proceeds of the life insurance policy, number 774-889, in the amount of $30 million. Brandon slammed his hand on the table, a triumphant shout escaping his lips. Boom! Did you hear that, Winston? All of it. The house, the money, mine. I told you I won. He turned to Tanya, grabbing her face and kissing her hard right there in the meeting. We are rich, baby. We are going to buy that boat. We are going to Ibiza. Tanya squealed, clapping her hands. Oh my God, Brandon! 30 million! I knew it! I sat in my chair, my hands clasped tightly together, my knuckles white. I looked at Brandon, his face flushed with greed, his eyes bright with the reflection of a future he would never have. He was so happy. He was so sure. He didn't notice that Pendergast hadn't stopped reading. He didn't notice that I hadn't flinched. Read it and weep, old man, Brandon shouted at me, pointing a finger in my face. You hear that? Lawful husband. That is me. You are nothing. You are a footnote. Now get out. Get out of my sight before I have security throw you out, Mr. Cole Pendergast said, his voice raising just slightly enough to be heard over the celebration. I am not finished. Brandon stopped his smile, faltering for a fraction of a second. What do you mean you aren't finished? You said I get everything. That is the end. There is a rider clause, Pendergast said calmly, turning the page. A codicil added 6 months ago. It contains specific conditions that must be met before any distribution can take place. Conditions? Brandon scoffed. What conditions? Like I have to visit her grave once a year? Fine, I will send flowers. Just give me the check. Pendergast looked at him, his expression cold and devoid of any amusement. No, Mr. Cole, not flowers. These are conditions regarding the nature of your marriage and your conduct toward Mr. Graves. Brandon froze. The color began to drain from his face very slowly, like wine from a cracked glass. Tanya's smile wavered. What are you talking about? Brandon asked, his voice dropping. What conduct? Pendergast adjusted his glasses and looked down at the document. He cleared his throat. The silence in the room stretched tight, snapping with tension. Shall I read the moral turpitude clause, Mr. Cole? Or would you like to guess what it says? The air in the room shifted as Pendergast adjusted the document in his hands. He looked at Brandon over the rim of his spectacles, his expression completely neutral, a blank canvas upon which Brandon was busily painting his own victory. The lawyer did not immediately read the clause he had threatened. Instead, he seemed to decide to give the mouse one last piece of cheese before snapping the trap shut. He flipped back a page, smoothing the paper with a deliberate, agonizing slowness. Let us clarify the inventory of the estate first, Mr. Cole, Pendergast said, his voice smooth as silk. Before we discuss conditions, it is prudent to understand exactly what is at stake. You seem eager to know the full extent of the windfall. Brandon leaned forward, his elbows resting on the polished mahogany, his eyes wide and hungry. That is what I am talking about, he said, licking his lips. Skip the legal mumbo-jumbo, just give me the numbers. I want to know exactly how many zeros are on that check. Pendergast nodded once. Very well. Pursuant to the primary beneficiary designation, the estate includes the following liquid assets. First, the Allianz life insurance policy, with a face value of $30 million, payable immediately upon issuance of the death certificate. 30 million, Brandon breathed out, the words escaping him like a prayer. He turned to Tanya, grabbing her hand and squeezing it hard enough that she winced. "Do you hear that, babe? 30. That is 3 times what I thought. I thought the old man was cheap." Pendergast continued, his voice droning on, a monotone litany of wealth. "Second, the Vanguard investment portfolio, comprised of blue-chip stocks and municipal bonds, with a current market valuation of $4.2 million. Third, the Chase private client checking and savings accounts, with a combined cash balance of $850,000. Brandon let out a low whistle, shaking his head in disbelief. Nearly $5 million in cash just sitting there? Caroline was sitting on $5 million cash, and she made me drive a 3-year-old BMW? That's stingy. He stopped himself, glancing at me, then grinned. Well, it doesn't matter now. It is all liquid. It is all mine. And finally, Pendergast said, the real property located at 14 Meadow Lane. As per the current market appraisal conducted last week, the property is valued at $12.5 million, free and clear of any mortgage liens. Brandon stood up. He didn't just stand. He shot out of his chair as if propelled by a spring. He threw his arms up in the air, a victorious roar tearing from his throat that echoed off the glass walls of the office. Yes, yes, that is what I am talking about. $47 million! $47 million! He grabbed Tanya by the waist and spun her around, her high heels scraping against the expensive carpet. We are rich, Tanya. We are filthy, stinking rich. We are not just Hamptons rich. We are buy your own island rich. Tanya was laughing, a shrill, piercing sound that grated on my nerves. Oh my God, Brandon, you did it! You actually did it! We can get the penthouse at 432 Park. We can get the G-Wagon in matte black. Brandon stopped spinning her and looked at me. His face was flushed, his eyes wild with the intoxication of sudden, unearned wealth. He walked over to where I was sitting, looming over me, blocking out the light from the window. He looked down at me with a mixture of pity and absolute loathing. You hear that, Winston? $47 million. And you know what the best part is? You spent your whole life scrimping and saving, clipping coupons, acting like a pauper, just so I could spend it all in one lifetime. I am going to burn through this money so fast it will make your head spin. He turned back to the table, pacing back and forth like a caged tiger that had just been fed raw meat. He pulled out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. I am calling the Ferrari dealership right now, he announced to the room. I want the SF90. Red. No, yellow. I want everyone to see me coming. And get Vinny on the line. Tell him I am paying him double today if he brings the papers to the club. He looked at Tanya, his eyes gleaming. And you, baby, you wanted to go to Paris for Fashion Week? We are going. Private jet. No more commercial flights. No more waiting in line with the peasants. We are buying front row seats. Tanya squealed, clutching my daughter's pearls. I want a Birkin, Brandon, the Himalayan one. Get 2, Brandon shouted. Get one for your dog. Who cares? We have $47 million. He looked back at Pendergast, who was watching this display with the detached interest of a biologist observing a lower life form. Okay, counselor, Brandon said, slapping his hands together. Give me the pen. I want to sign. I want the wire transfer initiated today. I have deposits to make. I have a life to start living. He looked around the room, his gaze landing on the antique globe in the corner. I'm going to buy a boat, he muttered, almost to himself. A 70-footer. And I am going to name it The Escape. Because I finally escaped this miserable family. He pointed a finger at me again. And you, old man, since I am in such a good mood, I am upgrading your severance package. Instead of $100, I will give you $1,000. $1,000 to disappear. Take a bus to Florida. Go sit on a beach and rot. Just don't ever let me see your face again. Consider it a tax write-off. Charity for the indigent. He laughed at his own joke, expecting Tanya to join in, which she did, her laughter echoing his cruelty. They were high on greed, drunk on the prospect of a future they hadn't earned. They were already spending money that wasn't in their accounts yet. They were dividing the spoils of war over the warm body of my daughter. Brandon grabbed the water pitcher from the table and poured himself a glass, chugging it down as if it were champagne. Ah, tastes like victory, he sighed, slamming the glass down. All right, Pendergast, wrap it up. I am bored. Give me the signature page. Let's make this official so I can get out of here and start stimulating the economy. He leaned over the table, extending his hand for the pen, his eyes fixed on the documents as if they were holy writ. He didn't see the look Pendergast gave me. He didn't see the slight, almost imperceptible nod I gave in return. He was so busy counting his millions, so busy planning his new life of excess, that he had forgotten about the rider clause. He had forgotten about the conditions. He had forgotten that in the world of high finance, nothing is free, and the fine print is where the devil lives. He was standing on the summit of his own greed, looking down at the world, believing he was untouchable. He had no idea that he was standing on a trap door, and I was holding the rope. Pendergast did not hand him the pen. He did not push the signature page forward. Instead, he closed the folder containing the list of assets. The sound of the heavy paper cover slapping shut was sharp and final. Brandon blinked, confused. "What are you doing? Give me the pen." Pendergast folded his hands on top of the file. "As I mentioned before, Mr. Cole, there are conditions. You cannot access the $47 million nor the title to the property until we verify compliance with the rider clause." Brandon rolled his eyes, letting out an exasperated groan. "Oh my God, are we back to this? Fine, read the damn clause. What do I have to do? Erect a statue of Caroline in the garden? Keep her cat? I will do whatever. Just read it so I can sign." He drummed his fingers on the table, looking at his watch, checking his phone again. He was already mentally spending the money. He was already gone. Pendergast opened the second folder, the thin one, the sharp one. "This clause," Pendergast said, his voice dropping to a gravelly low, "is known as a moral turpitude and fidelity provision. It was drafted at the specific request of the deceased, Caroline Graves Cole, 6 months prior to her death." Brandon froze. His hand stopped drumming. The words fidelity and 6 months ago seemed to penetrate the fog of his arrogance. "Fidelity?" he asked, his voice tighter. "What does that mean?" "It means," Pendergast read, looking directly into Brandon's eyes, "that the entire bequest, the house, the insurance, the stocks, the cash, is contingent upon the beneficiary, Mr. Brandon Cole, having remained faithful to his wife during the course of their marriage. Specifically, it states that if there is evidence of adultery, infidelity, or an extramarital romantic relationship during the marriage, the beneficiary is automatically disqualified from receiving any portion of the estate." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a vacuum. Brandon's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Tanya's eyes went wide, and she instinctively took a half step away from him. Furthermore, Pendergast continued, relentless, the clause stipulates that the beneficiary must continue to provide housing and care for the deceased's father, Mr. Winston Graves, within the primary residence for the remainder of his natural life. Failure to adhere to either of these conditions results in the immediate revocation of all inheritance rights. Brandon stared at the lawyer. The color had drained from his face so completely he looked like a wax figure. He looked at me, sitting in the corner, silent and watchful. Then he looked at Tanya, standing beside him in her short dress and my daughter's pearls. That is ridiculous, Brandon stammered, a nervous laugh bubbling up from his chest. That is not enforceable. You can't put that in a will. It is my private life. It is a contract, Mr. Cole, Pendergast said coldly. A contract you agreed to by remaining married. And as for enforceability, I assure you, it is ironclad. Brandon slammed his fist on the table again, but this time it wasn't in triumph. It was in panic. You are bluffing. You don't have anything. I was a good husband. I loved Caroline. You can't prove a damn thing! This is just the old man trying to screw me over. I will sue you. I will take this house anyway. Pendergast didn't flinch. He simply reached for the third binder, the thick, black one. The one filled with the pictures Arthur and his team had been collecting for 2 years. He slid it across the table until it rested directly in front of Brandon. We anticipated your denial, Mr. Cole, Pendergast said softly. Would you like to review the evidence? Or shall I project the highlights on the screen for Miss Tanya to see as well? The binder sat on the table between us like a loaded gun. It was thick, heavy, and black, absorbing the light of the room just as it was about to absorb Brandon's future. Brandon stared at it, his chest heaving, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple to stain the collar of his expensive new shirt. He did not reach for it. To open it would be to admit that there was something inside worth seeing, and Brandon operated on a strict diet of denial. I don't need to look at your scrapbook, Pendergast, Brandon spat, pushing the binder away with the tip of his finger as if it were contaminated. This is a joke. It has to be. You cannot condition an inheritance on who I sleep with. It is unconstitutional. It is a violation of my privacy. I spoke to a lawyer friend at the club. He said testamentary freedom has limits. You cannot rule from the grave. Pendergast didn't blink. He didn't even look annoyed. He simply interlaced his fingers and leaned back, the picture of calm authority. Your club friend is referring to conditions that promote divorce or illegal acts, Mr. Cole. A clause requiring fidelity is perfectly legal. It is a condition precedent. You must qualify to receive the gift. If you do not meet the criteria, the gift never vests. It is quite simple. Brandon stood up and walked to the window, unable to sit still. He ran a hand through his hair, messing up the perfect styling. He was vibrating with a mix of adrenaline and terror. He turned back to us, a manic grin plastered on his face. Okay, fine. Let's play your game. Say the clause is real. I was faithful. I was the best husband Caroline could have asked for. She was sick, remember? She was tired. I took care of her. I paid the bills. I managed the house. He gestured vaguely at Tanya, who was sitting very still, her eyes darting between Brandon and the binder. Tanya she is an associate, a business partner. She helped me with networking. Caroline knew her. Caroline liked her. I almost laughed. The audacity was breathtaking. Caroline had hated Tanya. She had cried herself to sleep because she smelled Tanya's perfume on Brandon's shirts. Pendergast raised an eyebrow. An associate? I see. And do you typically buy your associates $40,000 worth of jewelry using your wife's emergency credit card? Do you take your associates to St. Bart's for the weekend while your wife is undergoing chemotherapy? Brandon's face turned a violent shade of red. That was business. We were scouting locations. And the jewelry, that was an investment. You are twisting everything. Pendergast ignored the outburst and tapped the second condition on the paper. Let us put the fidelity issue aside for a moment, Mr. Cole. Let us assume, for the sake of argument, that you can explain away the hotel rooms and the diamond necklaces. We still have the second condition, the care and support clause. Brandon groaned, throwing his hands up. What now? I have to build a shrine? Please listen closely, Pendergast said, his voice sharpening. The clause states, the beneficiary must provide continuous, uninterrupted residence and care for Winston Graves within the main dwelling of the Hamptons estate. Mr. Graves must retain his current bedroom suite. He must be provided with food, utilities, and medical access. He must be treated with dignity. If at any point Mr. Graves is evicted, removed, or coerced into leaving, the entire estate forfeits immediately. The room went silent again. This condition was the physical trap. The fidelity clause was the moral trap, but this was the lifestyle trap. Brandon looked at me. His eyes were full of hate, a pure, distilled loathing that would have withered a lesser man. But I just looked back, my face impassive. You want me to live with him? Brandon hissed. You want me to keep him in my house? He is a leech. He contributes nothing. He sits around reading newspapers and judging me. I kicked him out last night because I finally own the place. It is my house. I can decide who lives there. Correction, Pendergast said. It is not your house. Not yet. The title transfer is contingent on the probate closing, and the probate cannot close until the executor, that is me, certifies that all conditions have been met. Pendergast paused for effect. And since you admitted, on the record, not 5 minutes ago, that you kicked Mr. Graves out last night, you have already violated the clause. Technically, Mr. Cole, you disqualified yourself 12 hours ago. Brandon froze. His mouth opened and closed. He looked like a fish gasping for air on the deck of a boat. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His arrogance, his celebration, his cruelty in the rain. It had all been a confession. No, Brandon stammered. No. That doesn't count. I didn't know about the will then. You can't hold me to a rule I didn't know existed. That is entrapment. Ignorance of the terms is not a defense, Pendergast said coldly. However, the clause does allow for a cure period. If the violation is rectified within 24 hours, and if Mr. Graves confirms he has been reinstated to his satisfaction, the condition may be considered met. Brandon's head snapped toward me. He looked at the clock on the wall. He did the math. He had kicked me out around 7 in the evening. It was now 10 in the morning. He had time. He let out a breath, a ragged sound of relief. Okay, fine. He walked over to me, looming over the chair. He didn't kneel. He didn't apologize. He just barked orders. Get up, Winston. We are going home. You can have your room back. I will even buy you a new TV. Just tell him. Tell him you are coming back. He reached out to grab my arm, to physically pull me up, to drag me back to the life of a dependent. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I just looked at his hand until he pulled it back. I am not going anywhere with you, Brandon, I said quietly. Brandon's face contorted. What? Are you deaf? You have to come back. If you don't come back, I lose the money. Do you understand? I lose the 30 million. You were going to ruin everything because of your pride? It is not pride, Brandon, I said. It is standards. I don't live with adulterers, and I certainly don't live with men who throw my luggage into the mud. Brandon turned to Pendergast, frantic. You hear him? He is refusing. I am offering him the room. I am complying. If he refuses, that is not my fault. You can't punish me because he is stubborn. Pendergast consulted the document again. The clause says, provide care. If the environment is hostile, if the beneficiary has displayed aggression, Mr. Graves is within his rights to refuse. And if he refuses for cause, the condition is failed. Brandon exploded. He slammed his hands onto the table, leaning into Pendergast's face. This is a setup. This is a rig. You and the old man cooked this up. Caroline didn't write this. She was too stupid to write this. She did whatever I told her. She wouldn't lock me into a cage with her father. The insult to my daughter hung in the air, toxic and vile. She was too stupid. That was what he thought of the woman who had loved him. That was what he thought of the woman who had saved him. Tanya stood up then, her voice trembling. Brandon, she said. Brandon, stop! He spun on her. Shut up. You don't get to talk. You were just here to look pretty. Tanya recoiled, her hand going to her neck, clutching the pearls. But Brandon, she whispered, if you don't get the money, what about the debts? What about Vinny? The name Vinny dropped into the room like a grenade. Brandon went white. He had forgotten about the microphone. He had forgotten that Tanya knew. He had forgotten that his life wasn't just about losing a fortune. It was about losing his kneecaps. He looked at me, terror replacing the anger in his eyes. Winston, he said, his voice dropping to a plead. Winston, look. I know we have had our differences. I know I haven't been the best son-in-law. But you have to help me. You can't let this happen. If I don't get that money, bad things are going to happen. Serious things. I looked at him, studying the sweat on his upper lip. You mean the gambling debts? I asked. The $500,000 you owed to the syndicate. Brandon stumbled back, hitting the edge of the table. How do you know about that? I know everything, Brandon, I said. I know about the bets on the Knicks. I know about the poker games in Atlantic City. I know you mortgaged your future on a pair of dice. He looked around the room, paranoid now, realizing the walls had ears. You have been spying on me? I have been protecting my investment, I corrected. And right now, that investment is looking very poor. Brandon's face twisted. The fear turned back into rage, the cornered rat lashing out. You think you are so smart? You think you can hold this over me? I am the legal owner. I am the husband. I will fight this. I will tie this up in court for years. I will burn through every cent of that estate in legal fees before I let you win. He grabbed the binder of evidence, the one Pendergast had slid across the table, and threw it across the room. It hit the wall with a heavy thud, photos spilling out across the floor like a fan of damning playing cards. There, Brandon shouted. There is your evidence. Trash. It is all fake. I deny it all. Now where is the check? Give me the check or I will burn this building down. Pendergast stood up slowly. He pressed a button on the intercom. Security, he said calmly. Please escort Mr. Cole and his guest out of the building." "No!" Brandon screamed. "No! I am not leaving. I want my money." He lunged for the will, trying to grab the papers, maybe thinking if he destroyed the document, the rules would disappear. But Arthur was there. My driver, my banker, my protector, stepped out from the shadows near the door where he had been standing silently. He caught Brandon by the wrist, twisting it behind his back with the efficiency of a man who had trained with special forces. Brandon yelped, forced to his knees. "Let go of me! Do you know who I am? I am worth $47 million. Arthur looked down at him, his face impassive. "Currently, Mr. Cole, according to the live feed from your bank, you are overdrawn by $400. Tanya let out a sob. She looked at Brandon on his knees, then at me. She started to back away toward the door. "I didn't know," she stammered. "I didn't know he was broke. I thought... He said he was a partner." She looked at the pearls around her neck. Then, with trembling hands, she unclasped them. She put them on the table next to Pendergast. "I don't want these," she said. "I don't want any of this." She turned and ran out the door, her heels clicking fast, fleeing the sinking ship. Brandon watched her go, his face crumbling. "Tanya! Tanya, wait! It is a mistake! I will fix it!" But she was gone. Security guards entered the room, 2 large men in dark suits. Arthur released Brandon, who slumped to the floor, rubbing his wrist. "Mr. Graves," Pendergast said, ignoring the man on the floor. "Since the primary beneficiary has been disqualified due to violation of the moral turpitude clause and the care clause, the estate now reverts to the secondary beneficiary." He opened the final folder. "The Omega Trust," Pendergast read. "Sole trustee, Winston Graves." Brandon looked up. He looked at me, and for the first time, he really saw me. He saw the suit. He saw the way Pendergast deferred to me. He saw the lack of fear. "You?" Brandon whispered. "You are the trust?" I stood up and walked over to him. I looked down at the man who had told me to die in a dumpster. "I am not just the trust, Brandon," I said. "I am the bank. I am the landlord. I am the insurance company. I own the mortgage on the house you thought was yours. I own the firm you work for. I own the debt you owe to Vinny." His eyes went wide, pupils dilating in shock. "Vinny? You own Vinny?" "I bought his debt portfolio this morning," I said simply. "Which means you don't owe the mob anymore, Brandon. You owe me. And I collect with interest." I turned to the security guards. "Get him out of my sight." As they dragged him out, kicking and screaming, shouting promises and threats that faded down the hallway, I felt a deep, cold silence settle back into the room. It was done. The trap had snapped shut. But the work wasn't finished. I picked up the pearls Tanya had left on the table. They were warm from her skin. I wiped them with my handkerchief. "Put these in the vault, Pendergast," I said, "and call the police. I believe we have a case of embezzlement to report." "Yes, Winston," Pendergast said. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. It was a beautiful day. The rain had stopped, and my daughter could finally rest in peace. The hallway outside the executive suite of Pendergast and Associates was a study in minimalist corporate power. All glass walls, brushed steel, and silence. But that silence was currently being shattered by the raw, animalistic roaring of a man whose reality had just fractured. Brandon had not gone quietly. He had managed to twist away from the security guards, his suit jacket torn at the shoulder, his face a mask of purple rage that clashed violently with the serene environment. He wasn't leaving. Not yet. He had convinced himself that this was a negotiation tactic, that Pendergast was bluffing, that I was merely a senile old man playing dress-up in a power suit. He stood in the center of the lobby, chest heaving, pointing a shaking finger back at the glass doors where I stood watching him. He looked like a madman, his hair wild, sweat dripping down his neck, the expensive aviator sunglasses now crushed under the heel of his shoe.
"You can't do this, Graves," he screamed, his voice cracking. "You think a piece of paper in a binder scares me? You think a fake trust fund stops me? I know my rights. I know the law."
He reached into his pocket, fumbling for his phone, tapping the screen with frantic, clumsy fingers. He pulled up an image, shoving the phone toward the glass as if the pixels could shatter the barrier between us.
"Look at this,"
he shouted, spitting on the floor.
"Look at it, you old bat! This is the deed to 14 Meadow Lane. Caroline put my name on it 3 years ago. Joint tenancy with rights of survivorship. Do you know what that means? It means the will doesn't matter. It means the trust doesn't matter. It means the moment she died, I became the sole owner by operation of law."
He was lying, of course. Or perhaps he believed his own con. Caroline had never put him on the deed. She had allowed him to play pretend, to tell his friends at the country club that he owned the estate. But she was her father's daughter. She knew better than to hand over the keys to the castle. But Brandon was clinging to this delusion like a drowning man clutching a stone. "I am selling it!" he yelled, pacing back and forth, addressing the terrified receptionist and the stoic guards as his jury. "I am listing it today. I already have a buyer, a developer. He wants to tear it down and build condos. I am going to let him. I am going to sign the papers this afternoon. I will bulldoze your precious memories, Winston. I will turn your daughter's garden into a parking lot." He laughed, a manic, jagged sound. "You hear me, Winston? I will sell the dirt from under your feet. I will burn that house to the ground before I let you step foot in it again. You think you can blackmail me with a morality clause? I am the owner on record. Possession is 9/10 of the law, and I have the keys." He was working himself into a frenzy, feeding off his own noise. It was the classic extinction burst of a narcissist who has lost control. He couldn't attack the logic, so he attacked the reality. He denied the facts. He rewrote history in real time to suit his narrative. And then the threats turned personal. He stopped pacing and pressed his face against the glass door, his breath fogging the surface. His eyes were wide, pupils dilated, filled with a hate so pure it was almost impressive. "You are dead, old man," he hissed, his voice dropping to a menacing register that vibrated through the glass. "You think you are safe because you have a lawyer? You have to sleep sometime. You have to walk down the street. I know people. I owe money to bad people, remember? Well, maybe I will tell them that you are the reason I can't pay. Maybe I will tell Vinny that if he wants his money, he should come talk to you." He slammed his open palm against the door. "I will bury you, Winston. I will make the rest of your short life a living hell. I will sue you for intentional infliction of emotional distress. I will sue you for fraud. I will tie up your assets until you starve. You messed with the wrong guy. I am Brandon Cole. I am a survivor. I always win." He turned to the security guards who were closing in again, wary of his erratic movements. "Don't touch me!" he shrieked, swinging his arms. "I am leaving, but I am coming back with a sheriff.
I am coming back with an eviction notice for this whole firm. You are all going to pay." He looked back at me one last time. There was no fear in his eyes anymore, only a delusional, terrifying certainty. He truly believed he could talk his way out of this. He believed that if he just screamed loud enough, the world would bend to his will. "You will regret this," he spat. "You will regret the day you decided to cross me. I am going to take everything. The house, the money, the legacy. And when you are dying in a hospital bed, alone, I am going to come and pull the plug myself." He straightened his torn jacket, attempting to regain a shred of dignity that had evaporated hours ago. He adjusted his collar, sniffed loudly, and pointed at Pendergast, who was standing beside me. "You are disbarred," he said flatly. "Consider your career over." With that, he turned and marched toward the elevator banks, stabbing the call button repeatedly. He didn't look like a defeated man. He looked like a man on a mission. A man fueled by a potent cocktail of denial and rage. He was going to war against a mountain with a plastic spoon, convinced he could knock it down. I watched him go, feeling nothing but a cold, distant pity. He was threatening a man who owned the building he was standing in. He was threatening to sell a house he didn't own. He was threatening to sue a firm that wrote the laws he was citing. He had no idea that the elevator he was waiting for had been remotely locked by security. He had no idea that the police were already waiting in the lobby downstairs. He was still living in the fantasy where he was the protagonist. But the credits were already rolling. "You keep talking about the law, Brandon," I said, stepping into the hallway. "You keep talking about your rights as a husband, but you seem to forget that a husband has duties." I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. I didn't need a binder for this. I had kept the best ones for myself, close to my heart like a burning coal. I threw them. They fluttered through the air, hitting his chest, sliding down his expensive, ruined suit, landing face up on the marble floor. They were not grainy surveillance shots. They were 4K photographs taken by a former Mossad agent I kept on retainer. Brandon looked down. He couldn't help it. The human eye is drawn to its own image. There he was, in the royal suite of the Plaza Hotel. There he was, poolside in Miami. There he was, kissing Tanya's neck, while my daughter was in her 3rd round of chemo. The silence that followed was heavy. "That is not me," Brandon whispered. The denial was so pathetic it was almost funny. "It is you, Brandon," I said. "And it is Tanya. And the date stamp on the bottom right corner? That was 2 days before Caroline died. You were not at the pharmacy picking up her pain medication, were you? You were picking up diamond earrings for your mistress." Tanya, who had been hovering near the exit, froze. She saw the photos too. She saw the dates. But she saw something else. She saw the collapse of her golden parachute. "You said she knew," Tanya said, her voice trembling. "You told me Caroline had an arrangement. You said she didn't care as long as you were discreet." Brandon spun around, his face a mask of panic. "Shut up, Tanya. Don't say a word. These are fakes. The old man photoshopped them. It is deep fake technology. He is trying to frame me." I laughed. It was a cold sound. "I do not know how to use Photoshop, Brandon, but I do know how to read a credit card statement." Pendergast showed him the receipts. Pendergast stepped forward holding a single sheet of paper. "Tiffany and Company, 5th Avenue. Pendergast read aloud. "Yellow diamond pendant, $42,000. Charged to the joint account of Brandon and Caroline Cole.
Date of purchase, October 14th. The same day Mrs. Cole was admitted to the ICU. Tanya gasped. She reached up instinctively, touching her neck where a pendant likely rested.
"You used her money?" Tanya screeched. "You told me you bought this with your bonus. You told me you were a partner at the firm." "I am a partner," Brandon yelled, lying until his last breath. "I am the top earner. This is all a setup."
"You are an entry-level broker, Brandon," I said, cutting him down. "And you haven't made a sale in 6 months. I know because I own the brokerage. I saw your performance reviews. They are abysmal." Brandon looked at the photos on the floor, then at Tanya, then at me. The walls were closing in.
"It doesn't matter," he shouted, desperate to find a loophole. "Infidelity is grounds for divorce, not disinheritance. We were still married. She didn't divorce me. I am still the heir."
"The rider clause," I reminded him. "Moral turpitude. Caroline didn't have the strength to divorce you, Brandon. She was dying. But she had the strength to sign a paper. She had the strength to ensure that if you weren't faithful, you would be destitute." Tanya looked at Brandon with eyes that had turned into hard stones. The realization was washing over her. There was no $30 million. There was no mansion. There was no yacht. There was only a man with a negative bank balance and a mountain of debt to the mob.
"You broke."
Tanya spat the word like a curse.
"You are actually broke." "No, baby, listen," Brandon pleaded, reaching for her. "We can fight this. We can sue. We just need a bridge loan."
"If you can lend me a little cash, just to hire a real lawyer." Tanya laughed. It was a hysterical sound.
"Lend you cash? I am dating you for the cash, you idiot. I have bills. I have a lease on the Porsche. You said you were going to pay it off today."
I will, Brandon promised, his eyes wild.
"Just stick with me. We are a team." "We are not a team," Tanya said, stepping back, her heels clicking on the marble. "I am a model. You are a fraud."
She looked at the photos on the floor.
"And you are a liar. You told me she was already dead inside. You told me she hated you. But you were the one spending her money while she was dying."
She looked at me.
"I didn't know about the clause," she said to me, her voice devoid of apology but full of self-preservation. "I didn't know he was stealing from her. I just thought he was rich."
"Greed is a form of blindness," I said. "Now you see." Tanya nodded. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet box. She threw it at Brandon. It hit him in the chest and fell to the floor. "Take your ring," she said. "It is probably fake anyway."
"Tanya!"
Brandon screamed as she pushed past the security guard and ran for the door.
"Tanya, come back! I love you!"
But she didn't look back. She ran out into the city, disappearing into the morning traffic, leaving Brandon alone with his lies. He stood there, breathing heavy, his chest heaving. He looked down at the ring box. He looked at the photos of his infidelity scattered like trash. He looked at me. The arrogance was cracking. The denial was fracturing. "You ruined my life," he whispered. "You jealous, vindictive old man. You couldn't stand that she loved me. You couldn't stand that I was young and alive, and you were just a relic." "She didn't love you, Brandon," I said softly. "She loved the man you pretended to be. She loved the mask. But in the end, even she saw what was underneath. That is why she signed the paper. That is why she left you nothing."
"I will burn that house down,"
Brandon hissed, his eyes filling with tears of rage. If I can't have it, no one can. I will go there right now. I will light a match. I will watch it burn to the ground. You won't make it to the highway, I said, checking my watch. Watch me, Brandon challenged, turning to run. Brandon, I called out, stopping him one last time. Before you go running off to commit arson, you should know something about the deed you were waving around earlier. He stopped. He turned. What about it? You said you were on the title, I said, taking a step closer. You said it was joint tenancy. You said you owned it. I do, he shouted. I saw the papers. Caroline showed me. Caroline showed you a photocopy of a draft, I said. She never filed it, and even if she had, it wouldn't matter. Why? Brandon asked, his voice trembling. Why wouldn't it matter? I smiled. It was the smile of the ghost. Because Caroline didn't own the house, Brandon. Pendergast stepped forward, holding the final document. The death blow. The property at 14 Meadow Lane is held in a life estate, Pendergast announced, owned by Omega Holdings. Caroline Graves merely had the right of occupancy during her lifetime. Upon her death, the property rights revert instantly to the holding company. Brandon stared at us. The math was finally adding up in his head. No will, no deed, no insurance, no girlfriend, no money. Who? Brandon whispered. Who owns Omega Holdings? I adjusted my cuffs. I looked him in the eye. I believe we have covered that, I said. I am Omega. I am the beginning and I am the end of your lifestyle. Brandon's knees gave way. He didn't fall because he was pushed. He fell because the weight of the truth was too heavy to stand under. He collapsed onto the marble floor, surrounded by the high-definition proof of his own destruction. He looked up at me, and for the first time I didn't see a predator. I saw a prey. Please, he whispered. Winston. Dad, please. I looked down at him. Do not call me Dad. You lost that right when you bought earrings while my daughter was dying. I turned to Pendergast. Play the recording. Which one, sir? The one from the porch. The one where he tells me where to go. Pendergast tapped his tablet. Brandon's voice filled the lobby loud and clear. Go die in a dumpster, Winston. It is where you belong. The echo faded. You made your wish, Brandon, I said. Now you have to live in it. The echo of my own voice recording playing from the tablet seemed to hang in the vaulted lobby air like toxic smoke long after the audio had cut out. Go die in a dumpster, Winston. It was a crude, violent sentiment that sounded even worse when played back in the sterile environment of a law firm. Brandon remained on his knees on the cold marble floor, his chest heaving, his eyes darting frantically between me and Pendergast. He looked like a man who had just heard his own death sentence read aloud, but was desperately trying to find a grammatical error in the verdict that might set him free. That is not legal, he choked out, pointing a shaking finger at the tablet. You recorded me without my consent. That is inadmissible. You can't use that. It was an emotional moment. I was grieving. I didn't mean it. Pendergast did not even look up from his file. He simply adjusted his glasses and spoke with the dry, detached tone of a coroner determining a cause of death. New York is a one-party consent state, Mr. Cole. As Mr. Graves was a party to the conversation, his consent to record is sufficient. The recording is perfectly legal. And as for your intent, it is irrelevant. The moral turpitude and care clause does not make exceptions for grief or emotional outbursts. It strictly prohibits any act of hostility, eviction, or failure to provide shelter. Pendergast walked around the table, his footsteps echoing with a rhythmic finality. He stopped in front of Brandon, looking down at him. By verbally evicting Mr. Graves and physically removing his belongings from the premises, you committed a material breach of the condition precedent. The moment that suitcase hit the driveway, you forfeited your right to the insurance payout. The $30 million is gone, Brandon. It reverted to the trust the second you locked that door. Brandon scrambled to his feet, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. He wiped sweat from his forehead with his torn sleeve. "Fine," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Fine. Keep the insurance. Keep the cash. I don't care. I still have the house." He backed away toward the glass wall, as if trying to put distance between himself and the truth. "The house is worth $12 million, he babbled, his eyes wide and manic. "I can sell it today. I can take a bridge loan against the equity. I will be fine."
I don't need your charity, Winston. I have the deed. Caroline gave me the deed. I watched him with a mixture of pity and disgust. He was clinging to a lifeline that I had cut 10 years ago. He was so certain of his ownership, so arrogant in his belief that he had married into a gold mine, that he had never bothered to check the geological survey. "Brandon," I said, my voice cutting through his panic, "you need to listen very carefully. You do not have a deed. You have a piece of paper that Caroline typed up to make you feel like a man. It was never filed. It was never notarized. It was a prop in the play she staged to keep your fragile ego intact." "Liar!" Brandon screamed. "She loved me! She gave it to me!" Pendergast stepped forward again, holding the final document, the one that would sever the last thread of Brandon's reality. He held it up so Brandon could see the official seal, the stamps, the undeniable weight of bureaucracy. "This is the title search for 14 Meadow Lane," Pendergast stated. "If you look at the chain of title, you will see that Caroline Graves never held fee simple ownership of the property." Brandon blinked his brain, struggling to comprehend the legal terminology. "What? Fee simple? What are you talking about? It was her house. We lived there. She lived there," Pendergast corrected. "Under a life estate provision granted by the actual owner." "Life estate?" Brandon whispered the words, tasting like ash in his mouth. "It means," I explained, stepping closer to him, "that Caroline had the right to occupy the house for the duration of her natural life. She could live there. She could plant flowers. She could paint the walls. But she could not sell it. She could not mortgage it. And she certainly could not leave it to you in her will." I paused, letting the reality sink in. Upon her death, the life estate terminated automatically. The property rights did not pass to her husband. They reverted instantly to the grantor. Brandon looked at the document in Pendergast's hand, then at me. "Who?" he croaked. "Who is the grantor? Who owns my house?" Pendergast turned the document over, revealing the name at the bottom in bold black letters. "The property is, and always has been, wholly owned by Omega Holdings, LLC," Pendergast read. "Omega Holdings?" Brandon repeated. He looked around the room as if searching for a representative of this mysterious company. "Who is Omega Holdings? Is it a bank? Can I deal with them?" "I will make them an offer," I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, devoid of humor. "You cannot make them an offer, Brandon, because you are looking at the chairman of the board." I tapped my chest lightly. "I am Omega," I said. "I created Omega Holdings 20 years ago, Brandon. I put every piece of real estate I own into it. I did it to protect my family from taxes, yes, but mostly to protect them from people like you.
I knew that one day someone might try to take advantage of my daughter.
So I made sure she had nothing to give them but her love. If you had loved her, that would have been enough. But you wanted the assets. I took a step forward, forcing him to step back until his back hit the glass wall. You wanted the house, Brandon? It is my house. You wanted the furniture? It is my furniture. The bed you slept in? Mine. The wine you drank? Mine. You have been a guest in my world for 10 years, and you were too stupid to realize it. You own nothing. You have nothing. You are nothing. Brandon slid down the glass wall, his legs finally giving out. He sat on the floor. His expensive suit ruined his face, a mask of absolute defeat. The math was finally adding up in his head, and the sum was 0. No insurance because he cheated. No cash because he spent it. No house because it wasn't hers to give. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face, mixed with sweat and mucus. It was a pathetic sight. The master of the universe, the man who was going to buy a yacht and rule New York, was now just a sobbing heap on the floor of a lawyer's office. But I have rights, he whimpered, his voice small like a child's. I was her husband. I have rights. You have the right to remain silent, Pendergast said, closing the file with a snap. And I suggest you exercise it, because the police are on their way up. Brandon's head snapped up. Police? Why? I didn't kill her. It was an aneurysm. We aren't calling them for murder, Brandon, I said. We are calling them for embezzlement. I walked over to the conference table and picked up the 4th folder, the one we hadn't even opened yet. I tossed it onto the floor in front of him. It landed open, spilling spreadsheets and bank records. I bought your brokerage firm 3 weeks ago, Brandon, I said. Did you think I didn't know? Did you think I wouldn't audit the books? He stared at the papers, his face going gray. You have been skimming from client accounts for 2 years, I continued. Small amounts. Fudging the fees. Moving money around to cover your gambling debts. It is a classic Ponzi scheme, Brandon, and not even a clever one. You stole $1.2 million from the firm. No, Brandon whispered. No. I was going to pay it back. With the insurance money. I was going to put it all back next week. But there is no insurance money, I reminded him. Which means there is no payback. Which means you are going to prison. He started to hyperventilate, gasping for air, pulling at his collar. Winston, please, he begged, crawling toward me on his knees. Please don't do this. I am family. I was Caroline's husband. She wouldn't want this. She wouldn't want me in jail. Do not speak for her, I snapped, my voice cracking like a whip. You lost the right to speak her name when you brought your mistress into her home, before her body was even cold. You lost the right to mercy when you threw me out in the rain. I looked down at him, and I felt nothing. The anger was gone. The grief was still there, but it was quiet now. All that was left for Brandon was consequences. You told me to go die in a dumpster, I said quietly. I am not going to kill you, Brandon. I am going to let you live. But you are going to live with nothing. You are going to go to prison, and when you get out, you will have a felony record. You will never work in finance again. You will never own a home. You will never have a credit card. You will be exactly what you tried to make me, a destitute, forgotten man. The elevator dinged in the distance. Heavy footsteps approached the glass doors. 2 uniformed officers appeared, followed by a detective in a cheap suit.
Pendergast opened the door for them. "Gentlemen," Pendergast said, pointing to the man on the floor, "this is Mr. Cole. The evidence of the embezzlement is in that folder, and we have the security footage of him assaulting my security staff earlier." The officers walked in, pulling out handcuffs. Brandon didn't fight this time. He didn't scream. He just wept soft, broken sobs of a man who had flown too close to the sun and found out his wings were made of wax. As they hauled him to his feet, passing the expensive view of the city he would never own, passing the leather chairs he would never sit in again, he looked back at me one last time. "What are you gonna do?" he asked, his voice hollow. "With the money? With the house?" I adjusted my cuffs, straightening my jacket. "I am going to sell it, Brandon," I said. "I am going to sell the house. I am going to liquidate the assets. And I am going to donate every single cent, all $47 million, to the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, in Caroline's name." His eyes widened in horror. You were giving it away?" "Yes," I said, "because unlike you, I know that money is only good for what it can do for others." Caroline loved children. She couldn't have them, but she loved them. This will be her legacy. Not a yacht, not a sports car. A legacy of life. The officers pushed him toward the door. "And Brandon?" I called out. He stopped, looking back over his shoulder. "When you were sitting in your cell tonight, thinking about where it all went wrong, remember this. You didn't lose because of bad luck. You didn't lose because of the law. You lost because you underestimated the man in the cardigan." The doors closed, cutting off his sobbing. The silence returned to the office. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. The sun was shining. The storm was over. Pendergast walked up beside me, handing me a glass of water. "Well done, Winston," he said. "A clean sweep." I took the water and raised it in a silent toast to the sky. "For Caroline," I whispered. Then I turned back to the room, ready to sign the papers that would give it all away. I was Winston Graves. I was the ghost of Wall Street. And I was finally free. The silence in the room was not empty. It was heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm, waiting for the lightning to strike. Brandon sat slumped against the glass wall. His expensive suit ruined his face, a portrait of a man who had just watched his own execution. The police officers stood by the door, waiting for the final signal to haul him away, but I held up a hand. I wasn't done. There was one last layer of skin to peel back, one last lesson to teach. The silence was broken by a sound that made Brandon flinch. It was his phone. It had fallen out of his pocket during his tantrum and was lying face up on the polished mahogany table. It buzzed. Then it buzzed again. Then it began to vibrate continuously, a relentless, angry spasm of notifications that echoed off the hard surfaces of the office. "Pick it up, Brandon," I said, my voice cutting through the room. "It seems popularity has its price." He looked at the phone as if it were a bomb. His hand shook as he reached for it. He unlocked the screen, and the light from the display illuminated his terror. The first notification was a text from Chase Bank. "Fraud alert," the screen read. "Your Platinum Reserve card ending in 4490 has been suspended due to suspicious activity. Your checking account ending in 8821 has been frozen by court order. Current available balance, negative $420. Brandon swiped the notification away, desperate to ignore it, but another one popped up instantly. This one was from American Express. "Account canceled. Please contact our collections department immediately regarding the outstanding balance of $82,000. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and wet. My cards, he whispered. They are all declining. I nodded slowly. Protocol 0, Brandon. I told you, I own the bank. I didn't just freeze your assets, I audited your applications. You lied about your income on every single one of them. That is bank fraud. And banks don't like liars. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was a push notification from the Tesla app, connected to the Model S Plaid he had leased last week. The car he had bragged was faster than gravity. Vehicle repossession initiated. The notification stated in cold, glowing text, remote immobilization active. Location shared with recovery team. Please remove personal belongings. My car, Brandon choked out. They turned off my car. It is sitting in the parking garage downstairs. It is not your car, I corrected him. It is the bank's car. And since you used the company credit card to pay the down payment, the company I now own, it is technically stolen property. I imagine the tow truck is already hooking it up. You will have to take the subway to prison. He stared at the screen, scrolling frantically through the cascade of disasters. His gym membership canceled. His country club membership revoked for conduct unbecoming. His reservation at Nobu for tonight canceled due to invalid payment method. His entire identity, his entire life of borrowed luxury, was being deleted in real time, one push notification at a time. But the worst was yet to come. The phone began to ring, not a text, but a call. The caller ID flashed a name that made Brandon stop breathing. Vinny. He stared at the name, the phone vibrating in his hand, like a living thing that wanted to hurt him. He didn't answer it. He couldn't answer it. Brandon, I said softly, it is rude to keep your creditors waiting. He shook his head, terrified. No, I can't. He will kill me. He won't kill you, I said. I told you. I bought the debt. Vinny works for me now. He is calling to tell you that the payment terms have changed. Brandon let the call go to voicemail. A second later, a text message appeared. Mr. Graves says hello. The vigorish is paused, but we are keeping the kneecaps as collateral until the legal system is done with you. Don't drop the soap. Brandon dropped the phone. It clattered onto the table, sliding across the wood, until it hit the binder of evidence. It is over, he whispered, burying his face in his hands. It is all gone. Not all of it, I said. You still have your love life, right? You still have Tanya. She seemed very devoted. As if summoned by my sarcasm, the phone lit up one last time. It was a notification from Instagram. Tanya had tagged him in a post. Brandon reached for the phone again, a desperate hope kindling in his eyes. Maybe she was coming back. Maybe she had a plan. Maybe she loved him after all. He opened the app. Pendergast tapped a button on his console, and the image from Brandon's phone was mirrored onto the large wall screen for everyone to see. It was a photo of Tanya. She was sitting in the back of an Uber, wearing sunglasses and looking distraught. But it wasn't a sad distraught. It was a performative influencer distraught. The caption read, "Surviving. Just found out the man I thought I loved is a monster. He lied to me about everything. He stole from his dying wife. I am heartbroken, but I am strong. Hashtag survivor. Hashtag truth. Hashtag karma. Hashtag single." And then below that, a second photo. It was a picture of a pawn shop receipt, selling the ring of lies she had written. donating the proceeds to a charity for victims of narcissistic abuse. She hadn't donated it. I knew that. She had kept the cash. But the public humiliation was the point. She was distancing herself, rewriting the narrative, painting herself as the victim and Brandon as the villain. She was throwing him to the wolves to save her own reputation. She pawned the ring, Brandon whispered, his voice breaking. She posted it. Everyone can see this. My friends, my clients. You don't have clients, Brandon, I reminded him. And you don't have friends. You have an audience. And the show is over. He looked at the screen, at the woman he had destroyed his marriage for, the woman he had brought into my daughter's home. She had abandoned him the moment the credit card declined. She had stripped him of his last shred of dignity for a few thousand likes. She took everything, he sobbed. She took the jewelry. She took the cash in the safe. She even took the dog. I stood up and walked over to the table. I picked up his phone. It was still buzzing with comments from people mocking him, laughing at his downfall. She didn't take anything that was yours, Brandon, I said, turning the phone off and tossing it into the trash can. Because nothing was ever yours. You were a squatter in my life, and eviction day has finally arrived. I nodded to the police officers. He is all yours, gentlemen. They stepped forward, grabbing Brandon by the arms. He didn't resist this time. He didn't scream. He was a hollow shell of a man, emptied out by the vacuum of his own greed. His financial life was dead. His social life was dead. His freedom was about to die. As they dragged him toward the door, his feet dragging on the carpet, he looked back at me one last time. His eyes were dead, empty voids. "Why?" he croaked. "Why didn't you just tell me? Why didn't you tell me you were rich?" I looked at him, adjusting my glasses. "Because, Brandon," I said, "I wanted to see who you were when you thought no one was watching. And you showed me." The doors closed. The sobbing stopped. The phone in the trash can buzzed one last time, then went silent. I turned to Pendergast. "Cancel his cell service," I said. "Already done, sir," Pendergast replied. I looked out the window at the city below. Somewhere down there, a tow truck was hooking up a Tesla. Somewhere, a model was counting cash from a pawned ring. And somewhere, my daughter was smiling. It was a good day. The silence that followed the departure of the mistress and the revelation of the financial ruin was heavy, not empty. It was the crushing weight of reality settling upon a man who had spent his entire adult life building a castle out of clouds. Brandon was still on the floor, but he was no longer sitting. He had moved. He had crawled. He shuffled forward on his knees, his expensive torn suit pants sliding across the carpet until he was directly in front of me. He reached out with trembling hands, attempting to grasp the hem of my trousers, like a peasant begging a king for a crust of bread. I took a deliberate step back, moving my tailored wool suit out of his reach. I did not want his desperation to stain the fabric. "Winston," he choked out, his voice a wet, ragged sob. "Dad, please, look at me. I am begging you. I am on my knees. Is this what you wanted? To see me broken? To see me humiliated? Fine. You win. You broke me. I am dirt. But please, do not let them take me. Not prison. I cannot survive prison. I am not built for that." He looked up at me, his face a map of absolute terror. Snot ran from his nose, mixing with the tears. He looked pathetic. He looked small. It was hard to believe this was the same man who had stood on the porch 3 days ago, holding a glass of 60-year-old scotch and laughing at my misery. "I can work it off," he babbled, speaking faster now, desperate to find a purchase. "I am a good broker. I can make money. I will work for you. I will be your assistant. I will clean your house. I will do anything. Just pay off the debt. Make the charges go away. I will sign whatever you want. I will sign over my rights to everything." I looked down at him, observing him with the detached curiosity of a scientist examining a specimen under a microscope. He was bargaining with chips he didn't have. He was offering labor that was worthless. "You have nothing to sign over, Brandon," I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "We established that. And as for your labor, I have no use for a broker who steals from his clients. You say you are not built for prison, but I disagree. You are a liar, a thief, and a bully. You will fit in perfectly." "No!" he screamed, lunging forward again, trying to grab my shoes. "You can't do this! I was Caroline's husband. She loved me. If you send me to jail, you are spitting on her memory. She would hate you for this." That was the wrong thing to say. The anger I thought had burned out flared up again, cold and sharp. "Do not invoke her name," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than his screams. "You forfeited her protection the moment you decided she was just a payout. You want mercy? You should have shown mercy when you kicked a grieving 72-year-old man out into the rain. You want compassion? You should have shown compassion when you cheated on your dying wife." I looked at the police officers who were waiting respectfully by the door, giving me the space to deliver the final verdict. "Officer," I said, keeping my eyes fixed on the weeping man at my feet, "I believe we are finished here. Please remove the trash." The 2 officers stepped forward. They were not smiling. They were professionals, and they knew exactly what kind of man they were dealing with. They reached down and grabbed Brandon by the arms, hoisting him to his feet as if he were a rag doll. "Brandon Cole," one of the officers said, his voice a monotone recitation of doom. "You are under arrest." "No!" Brandon shrieked, struggling against their grip, his feet kicking uselessly at the air. "For what? I didn't do anything." "It is a civil matter. This is a family dispute. It is not civil," the detective in the cheap suit said, stepping into the fray. "You are being charged with grand larceny in the first degree for the embezzlement of $1.2 million from the accounts of Sterling Brokerage. You are also being charged with securities fraud and 20 counts of falsifying business records." Brandon went limp, the fight draining out of him as the list of financial crimes washed over him. But the detective wasn't done. Additionally, he continued consulting his notebook. Based on the video and audio evidence provided by Mr. Graves regarding the incident at the Hamptons estate 3 days ago, the district attorney has added a charge of endangering the welfare of an incompetent or physically disabled person in the first degree, also known as elder abuse. Brandon's head snapped up. "Elder abuse? He is not disabled. He is a billionaire. He is the ghost of Wall Street. He tricked me. He is a senior citizen whom you forcibly evicted without resources, shelter, or medication during inclement weather," the detective corrected him calmly. "The law does not care about his bank account, Mr. Cole. It cares about your actions, and your actions were criminal." The officer spun Brandon around. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was loud in the quiet room. Click, click, click. 3 clicks to end a life of pretense. 3 clicks to seal the coffin on his ambitions. Brandon looked over his shoulder at me, his eyes wide and hollow. The reality of the metal cuffs biting into his wrists seemed to finally pierce his delusion. He wasn't going to the club. He wasn't going to Paris. He was going to a holding cell in Lower Manhattan. "Winston," he whispered one last time. "Why?" I adjusted my glasses, smoothing the front of my jacket. "Because, Brandon," I replied. "You broke the contract. You broke the trust. And most importantly, you broke my daughter's heart. Consider this the late fee." The officers marched him toward the door. He didn't scream anymore. He didn't fight. He just wept, soft, broken sounds of a man who had finally realized that he was the architect of his own destruction. As they dragged him into the hallway, past the secretaries who stared with open mouths, past the glass walls that offered a view of the world he would no longer be a part of, I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't joy. It wasn't happiness. It was balance. The scales had been tipped for a long time, but now they were even. The door closed behind them, shutting out the sight of his ruined suit and his tear-streaked face. I was alone in the room with Pendergast. The silence returned, but it was different now. It was cleaner. Pendergast closed the file on the table. "The arraignment will be tomorrow morning," he said quietly. "We will oppose bail based on his lack of ties to the community and his flight risk status given the offshore attempts. He will stay in custody until trial." "Good," I said. "Make sure the press is there. I want his face on the front page of every paper in the city. I want everyone to know what happens when you cross the Graves family." I walked over to the chair Brandon had been sitting in. I picked up the pen he had been so eager to use, the pen he thought would sign his ticket to paradise. I turned it over in my fingers. It was a Mont Blanc, expensive, elegant, useless in the hands of a fool. I put the pen in my pocket. "Let's go, Pendergast," I said, turning away from the table. "We have a house to sell and a charity to fund." I walked out of the office, my stride long and purposeful. I did not look back at the empty chair. Brandon Cole was history, and I had a future to build. The revolving doors of the Pendergast building spun with a rhythmic hush, depositing me onto the sidewalk of Fifth Avenue. The air was crisp and clean, scrubbed new by the storm that had passed, both the meteorological one and the metaphorical one. The city was moving at its usual frantic pace. Taxis honking, tourists gawking, business people rushing to meetings. But for me, time seemed to slow down. I stood there for a moment, adjusting my cufflinks, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. It was the first time in 3 years that I felt truly warm. At the curb, the Rolls-Royce was waiting. Arthur stood by the open rear door, a sentinel in a dark suit. He didn't say a word as I approached, but his eyes held a question. He had seen the police cars. He knew what had happened upstairs. Before I got in, I looked toward the end of the block. A squad car was pulling away, its lights flashing silently against the midday traffic. In the back seat, through the reinforced glass and the wire mesh, I saw a silhouette. It was slumped, defeated, broken. Brandon Cole was leaving my life forever. Not in a luxury SUV, but in the back of a municipal vehicle on his way to central booking. I watched until the car turned the corner and disappeared into the canyon of steel and glass. I didn't feel triumph. Triumph implies a struggle, and this hadn't been a struggle. It had been a correction, a necessary realignment of the universe. I slid into the back seat of the Phantom. The door closed with a solid, reassuring thud, shutting out the noise of the city. The interior was a sanctuary of silence and soft leather. I reached for the crystal decanter and poured a small glass of vintage Bordeaux, the deep red liquid catching the light. "Where to?" Sir Arthur asked, meeting my eyes in the rearview mirror. "Back to the Pierre? Or should I set a course for the Hamptons?" I took a sip of the wine, letting the complex notes of oak and blackberry settle on my tongue. I thought about the house at 14 Meadow Lane. I thought about the library Brandon had destroyed, the garden where Caroline used to read, the kitchen where we had eaten silent, uncomfortable dinners while Brandon checked his phone. That house was not a home anymore. It was a crime scene of the heart. It was filled with the ghosts of my daughter's unhappiness and the echoes of Brandon's greed. I never wanted to step foot in it again. "No, Arthur," I said quietly. "We are not going back to the Hamptons." Arthur paused, his hand hovering over the gear shift. "Then what are your instructions for the property, sir?" "Sell it," I said. "Call the broker today. List it. I don't care about the market conditions. I don't care about the price. Just get rid of it. I want it sold fully furnished. I don't want a single spoon, a single book, or a single painting from that place. It is tainted." Arthur nodded, understanding immediately. "And the proceeds, sir, along with the insurance settlement?" I looked out the window at the passing cityscape, the empire I had helped build. I had spent my life accumulating wealth, hoarding it, protecting it. I had thought that money could buy safety. I had thought it could buy happiness for my daughter. I was wrong. Money had only attracted a parasite. It was time to put it to better use. "Establish a foundation, Arthur," I said, my voice firm. "The Caroline Graves Foundation for Orphan Children. Every penny from the sale of the house, every cent of the $30 million insurance policy goes into it. I want to build schools. I want to build homes. I want to give children who have nothing a chance to have everything." I paused, thinking of my daughter's gentle smile. "Caroline always wanted children," I added softly. "She never got the chance. This way, she will have thousands." "Very good, sir," Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion. "That is a fitting legacy. And for you, where shall I take you?" I leaned back into the seat, closing my eyes. I was 72 years old. I was alone. The family I had tried to build was gone. The son-in-law I had tried to mentor was in chains. But as the car began to move, gliding effortlessly through the traffic, I realized I wasn't empty. I was light. The heavy burden of the secret, the weight of the pretense was gone. I don't have to be the grandfather anymore, I thought. I don't have to be the ghost of Wall Street either. "Take me to the airport, Arthur," I said, opening my eyes. "The airport, sir?" "Yes. I have a villa in Tuscany that I haven't seen in 20 years. The olive trees should be ready for harvest. I think it is time I learned how to press my own oil. I think it is time I lived for myself." Arthur smiled, the first genuine smile I had seen on him in days. "Tuscany sounds perfect, sir." As the Rolls-Royce merged onto the highway, leaving the drama and the debris of New York behind, I took one last sip of wine. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass. The man staring back was older, yes. He was tired. But his eyes were clear. There was no fear in them. There was no regret. I had kept my promise. I had protected her. I had avenged her. "Goodbye, Brandon," I whispered to the empty air. And then I turned my face toward the sun, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't look back. The ledger was balanced. The account was closed. Winston Graves was finally retired. Greed is a blinding light. It makes you see the prize, but miss the cliff edge. Brandon believed that value was measured in assets, in square footage, and in bank balances. He never understood that the most expensive things in life, loyalty, integrity, and genuine love, cannot be bought, only earned. He mistook my silence for weakness and my simplicity for poverty. In the end, he learned the hardest lesson of all. When you treat people like disposable trash based on their net worth, you eventually find yourself in the dumpster you wished upon them. Character is the only legacy that survives the storm. If you believe that karma always collects its debts with interest, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of absolute justice.